Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, everybody. It's Pat DiCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world. Has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the people that agree to talk to me. And today we have a very fascinating person. He is the president, CEO, and chairman of the board of Northwestern Mutual. His name is Tim Gerend. And I've known Tim for many, many years, and I'm delighted to have him here. Thanks, Tim. Good morning.
Good morning, Pat. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. Thank you. So what time do you get in, by the way?
Depends on the day. I'm usually in before 8. I used to be like a super early in the morning guy, especially in my old law firm days. It was like my most productive time of the day. Mm-hmm. But now I like to get a little bit of stuff done at home. We've got one son still in high school, so it's nice to be able to see him in the morning before I head to the office. But I'm usually here by 8 or so.
Got it. So you and Jeff Bezos, I think, you both take time at home in the morning and then you go in.
That's right. That was a practice that I started during COVID. Oh. And it's like, you know what? I can show up here at 8 o'clock and the day still seems to go fine. And I can get plenty done at home in the morning. So it's good.
That sounds great. So as you may recall, I'm in the habit of asking people about their earliest memories. Yeah. And I just wondered, what are your earliest memories from when you were a young boy?
All right. So my earliest memory, I'll give you a little bit of background. So I was born in an Army hospital during Vietnam. I was actually born in Tacoma, Washington, Madigan General Army Hospital. My dad did graduate from college in 1969. He would have been drafted, but he went to officer school. And I was born in 1971. And immediately after I was born, he went to Vietnam. And so I, of course, have no memory at all of that. My mom and I were in the hospital for a couple of days in Washington, and then we went back to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, which is where my parents were both from. So I lived the first year of my life in Sheboygan, Wisconsin with my mom and my maternal grandparents. And my dad was in Vietnam. Fortunately, he came home safe and sound. He'd wanted to be a helicopter pilot, but thankfully he was not, because most of the helicopter pilots didn't come home from Vietnam. But he was a communications officer, and he came home right around the time I was 1. And we moved to a very small town in northeastern Indiana called Bluffton. He was employed by Corning Glass Works. You know, they were hiring veterans who were coming back from the war. So we moved away from where all of my parents' extended families were, aunts, uncles, cousins, all that. And my earliest memory is in my grandparents' house. And I can't tell you if I was 1.5 or 2.5, but I remember Christmas. So we had made a long drive, probably through a cold, snowy winter from northeastern Indiana to Wisconsin. And I just remember, I don't remember like specifics other than like a really bright flash bulb on a camera, you know, old school cameras. This was before the iPhone, needless to say. And my parents had big family and they were very hospitable. So there were always people at their house. And at Christmas, it was packed. So if you remember what the feeling was like when you were a little kid, maybe knee high, and you're just wandering through a sea of grownups. I ended up being the oldest of, I think, 16 or 17 grandkids on that side of the family. So there was nobody else around then. It was just me. But I remember like wading through the sea of adults, and I remember the noise and the smell and the lights and the Christmas tree and all that. And I also remember they were so happy to have us there. So if you can imagine what it's like as a grandparent, you know, I was with them for a year every day. And then I was gone. And back in those days, it was a little tougher to travel and get around. So it'd probably been a long time since they'd seen me. So I just remember like sort of the warmth of that family reunion kind of feeling. So that's, you know, one of my earliest memories for sure.
That's fascinating. It's hard to imagine. Like, I can't remember anything before the age of around 4. It's impressive that you can remember it from that young.
Yeah. And again, it's not the, you know, specifics, but like the feelings, like like I said, like the smells, the sound, the noise, and really just the love, right? Like all of that connection. It's so obviously very warm memory for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember anything about Bluffton?
Yeah, I lived in Bluffton from the time that I was 1 until I was about 12. So I remember a lot growing up in
Mm-hmm.
Bluffton. We lived in 2 different houses. I've got tons of memories of growing up there as a kid. You had a lot of freedom in a small town in those times. I remember when we moved when I was 4 or 5 years old. I remember my dad coached a little league team when I was probably 4 or 5. And so we had all the little leaguers at our house because we had the box of all the equipment, the
Mm-hmm.
catcher's mitt, the gear, all of that stuff. So I remember the old kids hanging out at our house and riding bikes around the neighborhood. And so, and growing up in a small town like that, it was mostly sports, school, and church were kind of the, dominant influences of our life. And my parents were very social. They had a lot of friends from Corning. And then Corning closed that factory. They made glass television tubes, believe it or not. We used to manufacture those in America. And they shut that factory down in the very early 1980s, which was a common thing that was happening that time in small towns in the upper Midwest. And instead of moving to Corning, New York, or somewhere in Western Pennsylvania, I remember my dad used to do a little recruiting for Corning in Penn State and State College and around that area. But anyway, he decided not to stay with Corning and to just go out on his own and look for a different job because he didn't want to leave the Midwest. We still have a lot of family ties in Sheboygan, and he didn't want to be east. He wanted to be somewhere closer to home. So he ended up at that time getting a job in Rockford, Illinois, after a little bit. But that was, the very formative stages for me too. That was a big transition for me.
What did he end up doing?
He ended up getting a job in human resources. So he worked sort of on the factory side and on the people side in Bluffton. I remember actually some early memories when things would not go well at the factory and my dad would get woken up in the middle of the night or whatever was happening at the plant. It was a manufacturing facility, so stuff happened. And I remember that being stressful, but also cool. I remember touring a glass factory as a little kid is kind of a cool thing to see. But anyway, he ended up getting a job in HR with a company called Barber Coleman that manufactured thermostats and controls. And then after a little bit of time at Barber Coleman, he ended up starting a business with a group of other guys that was basically HR consulting, predominantly executive recruiting and outplacement. And one of the things that was really cool, and I admire my dad a lot for it, he was very proud to become an entrepreneur and to sort of get out of corporate America, although his business ended up getting acquired a couple of times. So he ended up kind of at the end of his career finding himself right back in corporate America just because he liked to work and he just kept working. But one of the things that's interesting, he really gravitated towards the transition side of the business. So he did a lot of executive outplacement. And I think his own experience of transitioning from Corning and this thing that, was very important to him and that he loved, but, finding a new career on the other side of it helped him counsel other people through transitions. And his guidance about transitions has been really helpful to me. One of the hardest things you do as an executive is you work through transitions. You hire people, you fire people, that happens. And my dad's advice or his observations over the years were that in executive situations, people almost always ended up happier on the other side of the transition. Because in corporate America, you can sort of bounce your way into a job that you might or might not have chosen, but you end up there. And when you go through a transition, if you do it the right way, you take a step back and you think about what are you good at? What do you really want to do with your life? What would be a good fit for you? And he said, generally speaking, people ended up happier on the other side of transitions. He said the only time they didn't is when they took the first thing that came along because they just didn't want to be out of work. And, pressure, raising a family and wanting to have a job and all of that, I totally get it. But as I've, have helped coach people through transitions, either bringing them here or helping them look for something after Northwestern Mutual, really encouraging people to take a step back and think about what do they want and where do they want to be has been really useful to me. And my dad's, the other thing I would just say stand out about him, he's an eternal optimist and he loves people. So he didn't like the corporate part of the job, but he loved the relationship part of the job. With the people that he worked with, he developed really deep friendships. And I think there are probably some of those things, as you hear those themes, Pat, it's probably no coincidence that I've enjoyed so much working with all of you in the field. entrepreneurs, optimistic, coaching and advice, deep personal relationships. There were some things that were sort of, very familiar to me that I have a lot of respect and appreciation for. And it's one of the reasons that it's, been fun to watch you and your colleagues in the field build and grow their businesses over the years.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in perpetual transition. Every morning I wake up unemployed.
That's the path you've chosen, Pat. So,
amen.
But I think there's truth to that, and what you do to get up and face your day. I think that's right on.
But everyone has their. It's interesting. I was thinking about your dad too. Not only the Corning glass, but he made the transition from what branch of the service was he in?
He was in the Army.
In the Army to corporate America, and then from corporate America to small business, and then sort of back to corporate America. So he had 3 transitions or more.
Yeah, well, and I'd say he's at another one because he's as busy now as he's ever been, mostly doing volunteer work. He was a ski coach for a while. He taught ski lessons, and now he's a volunteer at a place called Bravehearts that does horse therapy for veterans. And so, finding purpose and passion in what he does, it's been, he's been a great example for my brothers and me for sure.
That's tremendous. Are both of your parents living?
They are, yeah.
What is your mom up to?
My mom's in Sheboygan. My parents were divorced when I was, I think, a senior in college.
Okay.
And she's married to a Presbyterian minister. She lives about an hour north of me. So she's back literally blocks from where she grew up. So that house that I talked about, I had all those memories in. She's just down the road from there. And my dad's just about an hour south of us. So they're both happy, healthy, very active. So we're really fortunate. And they're each about an hour away from us. So we get to see them a lot. They've made lots of effort to be around with the kids and see their sporting events, their grandkids. And so it's been, they're both doing great.
Lots of sporting events, eh?
We've had a lot. Yeah, we have 4 kids. They've been very active. And I'm at the point now where I'm appreciating that I'm going to miss it. Our youngest, Jake, is a junior in high school. Good kid, good athlete. And, we have fun following him around. So when he goes off to college in a year and a half, I'm going to miss it.
Amen.
Yeah.
So you, when you went to school in Sheboygan, you were there for 12 years, you said?
No, I was only in Sheboygan for a year. I was in Bluffton for 12 years. Yeah.
What do you remember early on in grade school, and what were you involved in when you were 5, 6 years old?
I remember bus rides. I lived in a rural area. I remember friend groups. I remember really looking forward to recess in gym, and a lot of basketball. If you grow up in a small town in Indiana, my joke is everybody has a basketball hoop. You don't even have to have kids. Like there's just a basketball hoop in every driveway. So we played sports year round. A lot of baseball in the summer. I had a couple of, I have a broken wrist and a broken elbow that were the end of my tackle football career when I was in kindergarten and 2nd grade. So I remember having a cast on and getting a lot of attention, and lots of basketball, and of course the school. And, those were good memories of small town America.
Did you have a job when you were a little kid?
Yeah. So when we moved from Bluffton to Rockford, Illinois, which was a really significant transition for me, and I can talk a little bit about, I was bused across town I actually talked about this at an education summit in Milwaukee a week ago. I was a good student. I tested into an accelerated program, but I got bused all the way across town to a very different neighborhood. I don't know if I was a minority in my school or not, but I might have been, but it was a very different environment than Bluffton, Indiana. And on the job question, we're from a hardworking middle-class family. One of my dad's mottos was work before play. So family chores all had to be done Saturday morning before you could go play with your friends. And when we moved to Rockford, I don't remember if he encouraged me or he made me, but one way or the other, I ended up with a morning paper route. So I delivered the Rockford Register Star which is a Gannett newspaper, every morning before 6 a.m. From the first day of 7th grade through when I graduated from high school.
Oh my gosh.
And the only days off, or if you're on vacation, you have to find a sub. And, they deliver a stack of papers to your house. And then back in those days, you also had the privilege of collecting the bill. So I thought it was quite a racket, actually, because the newspapers sell the papers wholesale to the 12-year-olds. And then if you don't collect, you're the one who doesn't get paid, because you already paid for the newspapers. But, I learned a lot, obviously, about hard work and discipline. And, you're up early in the morning when it's dark and no one else is awake, and you don't get a day off. So you just what we did. My middle brother had a paper route too. So, for many years, there were big stacks of papers at the end of our driveway. And then, of course, I had a bunch of other jobs just kind of growing up as a kid. I worked in a fast food restaurant. I lifeguarded. I cut lawns, whatever. But generally speaking, we had to make money to fund our own habits. So if you wanted skis or golf clubs or anything else, or to take someone out on a date, you would find a way to make a few dollars. So
I too had a paper route, and I remember getting up at 5 a.m. and just being terrified of going outside in the dark. I had a bike with a basket on each side,
right? And
so it didn't matter what time of year it was. I had the bike because even if it was snowy, I put all the papers in the baskets of the bike, and I would walk the bike if I had to. But I remember hearing cats sometimes at night. Did you ever hear screaming cats when you were?
Yeah.
Or I thought it was a baby in the woods or something.
Sure. Yeah. The other thing I remember is there was this family who had a boxer, a dog. And I lived in fear of this dog every day, because it didn't matter what time I was there. I would put the paper on the porch, or I'd toss it onto the porch. This dog would run into this aluminum door at like 100 miles an hour. And I just kept thinking, one of these days, the dog is going through the door. And I'm like, and then it's, then we'll see what happens. But so I remember a lot of barking dogs and cats and all of that stuff. And for most of the year, it's dark when you're up at those hours. And so that was my first real job, I guess.
I don't talk about it often or think about it often, but I do feel it was perfect training for life, because I did not want to get up early. I did not want to go out in the dark. And after a while, I got used to it.
And it's you do just get used to it. It's a habit, and you work your day around it. And and I still did sports and lots of other stuff in school. So you figure it out. And what I found, like as I went from there to college, when you go to college, you have a lot of freedom. I played golf at Butler, and I just found that I was better basically at everything, whether it was student government or fraternity kind of stuff, or sports or school, when I was busy. And I was much more disciplined around a schedule when I knew I was going to miss class for a tournament, or I knew I had to be up for practice or whatever. And so, I think it is great training, because you figure out what you need to do to make it work.
Amen. It's so interesting, because my kids are sort of at the same stage as your first three. And I have all this time on the weekends now. I still work 12 hours a day or whatever,
right.
but on the weekends, I don't have a lot going on. So all I have to do is work out. And I find that what few things I do have to get done take the whole day.
They take the whole day. They take whatever time you have. Yeah, that's right.
What's that law that it takes the amount of time you allot for it? I forget what it's called.
Yeah. It will expand to take all available time. Is exactly right. Yeah.
So you went to all the way through. Forgive me. Till how old were you when you moved from Rockford?
I moved just before 7th grade. So I was 12 or 13 or whatever. And then I was there for middle school and high school.
Got it. And how did you decide on Butler? Did they recruit you for golf, or? Oh,
this is a really easy. So I got a letter in the mail that said I could go there for free.
Oh my gosh.
And my dad said, he handed me the letter. He said, "Congratulations, this is where you're going to college."
That's great.
But the backstory is, we'd had some family friends who, when we lived in our Indiana days, who had a connection to Butler. So I was vaguely familiar with the school. and this is one of those great examples of like people who make a difference in your life. I had a teacher when I was a junior in high school. So I went to this accelerated program, a bunch of really smart kids and really great teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a teacher when I was a junior in high school. Her name was Mrs. Courier. She had a son who was a year older than me, who was in the same program. His name was John Courier. And she came to me when I was a junior and she said, I don't know what you're interested in doing, but my son just got this full academic scholarship to Butler. And you have a very similar profile to him. And so if you're interested, that might be something that would be an option for you. And so, I applied to a handful of schools, one or two out east maybe, but mostly like Illinois and Wisconsin. And then I applied to Butler. And my other motivation for applying to Butler is I was a decent high school golfer, and I picked it up a little bit late. Actually, I picked it up when we moved, mostly when we moved from Bluffton to Rockford, because I couldn't get on a baseball team. It was in the middle of the summer, so I just started playing golf instead. But anyway, I started playing a little tournament golf. I got to be okay at it, and I just thought I could keep improving, and I wanted to see how much better I could get, and I really liked it. I liked the competition. I liked the camaraderie. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to play golf at Illinois or Wisconsin or some other major school, but I thought maybe I could play at Butler. So I had an academic scholarship to go there. I went and visited. I looked at the scores of the kids on the team, and I thought I would be competitive there. And, I was the oldest of three kids, and I didn't know how much money my parents had saved for college. So I figured if I was going to go for free, that's good for the family. And it seemed like a good place for me. And as it turned out, Butler is just a terrific fit for me. I ended up walking onto the golf team, and I played, I think I was second on the team my freshman year, which was the best I ever did. By the time I was a senior, they had gotten smart and recruited a bunch of people who were better than me. So I think my senior year, I played maybe half the tournaments, but it was a great way to go through school. And it was also an opportunity for me. College is really a reset, and nobody has any preconceived ideas about you. And Butler was a place where I really was able to get involved in a lot of things. You could kind of be a big fish in a small pond, so to speak. And so I was very involved in a bunch of things on campus and leadership. I made a ton of great friends, got a very good education. I studied economics, and it was a great experience for me. And I had a ton of fun playing golf there, and I went to school for free. So that was a pretty good deal. And that gave me some options when I thought about what I was going to do next.
That's neat. You mentioned your organizational skills that you got from your paper route and
yes, right,
and other things.
Yeah,
like I really felt when I went to college. I mean, I was a mess. I was not a serious student. However, I was the social chairman of the rugby team for 6 seasons and the social chairman of my fraternity for 6 trimesters. And I attribute, though, being able to balance a checkbook and to deal with all kinds of disorderliness in a fraternity and a rugby team to having a small business as a kid.
You have to deal with all kinds of stuff. I was a rush chairman, treasurer, and then president of the fraternity, and you deal with all kinds of stuff. Discipline. And we had, for the most part, really good. We had a lot of good students and a lot of good athletes, so we didn't have like huge problems. But you deal with stuff. You get 70 or 80 college age guys. Just stuff happens. But it was a good leadership and life experience for sure.
There's always conflict, and you manage it for mutual benefit if you want the relationship to last, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I felt like that on the paper route. You'd have people that you knew could pay, and you'd have to wait. Sometimes I'd like stake out their house.
I'm with you. Like, oh, you don't have any money again this week, really? Like, it's $2.25 because you don't get the Sunday paper. So come on. Right. Anyway, yes.
But on the other hand, I didn't want to alienate them, right? And so the way that I asked is, I was always in a learning mode.
Yeah.
So you went to Butler.
You learn a lot about people and just kind of navigating people in all different kinds of circumstances. Yeah.
One of the things someone said this early on to me, I don't know if it was one of my grandparents or parents or who, but it was about motive, because I would get upset. Like these people they're not paying me because they're doing it to me.
Right. Yeah.
And someone said to me, you got to be careful when you assess motive. It's probably got nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
They're probably feeling pinched. They want the paper, but
Yeah.
who knows what they have going on in their
Yeah.
lives.
Generally speaking, it has nothing to do with you, right?
No,
As it turns out. But yeah.
they just wanted a free newspaper, and
Yeah.
I was pretty understanding.
Well, I
so
never cut anybody off.
me neither.
I just figure eventually they're going to pay.
Yeah, and they did. And
Yeah.
although I had one die owing me money, so I had to petition the estate. That's a joke.
Yeah, I know.
But how did you decide on law school?
It was a little bit. So I was economics major in the College of Business, and the economy when I graduated in 1993 wasn't amazing. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. And there was really nothing that I was interested in from a work standpoint. There wasn't anything really exciting to me. So I really debated between economics grad school and law school. And one of my economics professors was a University of Chicago guy. I was very curious about the Chicago School of Economics. And the reason I didn't go down that path immediately anyway was at that time, economics was moving very much through down the path of econometrics, really heavily mathematics based. And I was a really good math and science student, but I didn't take a very aggressive math curriculum when I was in college as an economics major. So if I would have wanted to go to economics grad school, I would have had to do a lot of catching up in math. And I was really more interested in, I would say, like the behavioral science part of economics. Like, why do people do what they do? How do incentives work? And I thought I could get a lot of that in law school. And there were a number of schools that had joint law MBA programs. And so I ended up going to law school at Notre Dame. I was fortunate to get in early. So I knew by Thanksgiving or so, my senior year of college, that's what I was going to do. So that was a good way to spend my senior year, knowing I was down that path. But I didn't sign up for a joint law MBA program right away because I was already taking out loans to go to law school. And I figured I would see how that went. And I ended up, starting at Notre Dame right after I graduated from Butler. And, so I was on from there. But that's how I ended up there. And I remember this is another one where, people who have an influence on you. I have some family history at Notre Dame, but I don't even think I applied to Notre Dame as an undergrad. And I had a good friend in my fraternity who was from Southern Indiana, and he said, you should go to law school at Notre Dame. And I don't remember why he suggested something about the curriculum. And I ended up applying, and I remember going to visit, and I went to a class. I drove up from Butler, up Highway 31, right up the center of Indiana to South Bend. And I saw a old legendary professor at Notre Dame named Father Murphy. It's just what you'd expect. There's a guy with a collar, right? And he was teaching this contracts class. And I remember after going through all the case law, calling on all the students, he said, he got into this whole policy discussion. It's like, this was the result of the case, but what should it be? What should have the answer been, and why? And it got into this sort of moral and philosophical discussion. And I thought, this is cool. Like, this is what law school should be. And so I was hooked at that point. And then I ended up, agreeing to go there. And I started there in the fall of 93.
What do you remember about law school? So you show up day one at Notre Dame?
Yeah. What I remember about law school, there are a bunch of things I remember. It was a great experience for me. It's where I met my wife, and I'm happy to get into that more. I got an unbelievable education. It was really fun. My wife, first year is really hard. In fact, I had one moment. I was coming out of the law library, and I thought I was having an aneurysm. I thought my head was going to explode. My head hurt so much. And I was home.
From studying, or?
Yeah, well, I didn't know. I thought so I go to an eye doctor when I'm home over Thanksgiving break or fall break or something. And he checks my eyes, and he said, your vision's great. And he said, let me ask you a question. He said, how hard did you have to study in college? Like, how much reading did you have to do? And I said, like, not a lot. And he said, how much are you doing now? I'm like, a lot. he said, you know that feeling? He's like, that's called eye strain. Like that's from studying. It will go away. You'll get used to it, kind of thing. So it was hard. So I remember it was especially the first year, but after that, really fun. We had great group of friends, some folks that I'm still in touch with. Lots of intramural sports, great environment on campus. I do remember I felt it's interesting that the Catholic influence at the law school isn't as dominant as it is in the undergrad school, but I was a Presbyterian kid growing up. And I remember feeling like not exactly not included, that would be too strong, but there was this thing that I wasn't totally included in, which was kind of the Catholic part of campus. But overall, I just remember a bunch of really smart people, great environment, and again, some really good friends. And that's where I met Sandy.
What were the circumstances meeting Sandy?
Well, if everyone at Notre Dame, I think, meets at church, I think is pretty much it. No, that's not how it happened at all. She was actually dating a friend of mine or a colleague of mine. We weren't super close, but when I was a first year, and I remember meeting her in the the spring semester, so second semester of my first year. And then I bumped into her again in the fall of my second year, and they were no longer dating. And we started dating kind of right away after that. She had been there as an undergrad. She was there. She was a year older than me. She was there as a biology grad student, working on her PhD. And we had a lot in common. She was from Muncie, Indiana, very family oriented, loves sports, good faith, great values. And she grew up in a family that did a little bit of skiing out in Colorado. We actually went to a very similar area. So we just kind of hit it off and we started dating. And I think after about a year and a half, maybe, we ended up getting engaged. I was just going into my very final semester of law school. And then we got married about in February of 97, so a little less than a year after I graduated.
And from there, did you go to practice law directly out of law school?
I did, yeah. I worked for Seyfarth Shaw, big law firm in Chicago, national firm based in Chicago. I started there. I was there as a summer associate, and then I went there full time. Fall of 96, until the time I joined Northwestern Mutual in October of 2002. So I was, I think, a 7th year associate at the time.
What kind of law were you practicing?
I did commercial litigation, some intellectual property, some antitrust, a lot of trade secret and restrictive covenant work, including non-competes involving salespeople. So I worked on a lot of distribution arrangements, some in insurance, some in investments, like in securities. But it was kind of a general litigation practice. Seyfarth was mostly known as a labor and employment firm, a management side labor and employment firm. And so a lot of our litigation came through our labor and employment partners. So that's why we had a lot of trade secret and non-compete work. But those were injunction kind of cases, temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. So I got a lot of like in courtroom experience as a very young lawyer, which is an unusual thing in a big firm, but it was, made for a steep learning curve. And, I didn't know how long I would stay there. If you would have told me when I joined, I would have been there 6.5 years. I wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't have thought I would stay that long. But it ended up going by fast, and, I worked for some great people and learned a lot.
Mm-hmm. What were the hours like?
Very long. They weren't the longest of the firms in Chicago and New York. Seyfarth was probably the 10th or so largest firm. They pitched themselves as a little more lifestyle friendly, but the billable hour requirements were serious. And, I was an early in the office person. I was always there before 7, usually 6:30 or something like that. Maybe those paper route wake up calls were training. And we had dinner catered in at the law firm every night at 6:30 or so. So if you were there, dinner was served, and we had breakfast available on Saturday mornings. And so the young associates and actually a lot of the more senior partners were there lots of nights for dinner and lots of Saturday mornings. And, since it was a national practice, there's also a fair amount of travel, and I had zero control over my calendar, zero. Like I went where I was told, whatever the client needed, whatever the case was, whenever the judge said to be there. So it was intense. So maybe I ended up getting like 14 years of experience in 7 years, but I worked a lot.
So when you say that the billable hours was a steep requirement, is that like 3,000 hours or 2,500 or?
No, it was more like our billable hour requirement was more like 2,000.
Okay.
But when you add up all of the other stuff you did, and there were lots of years that I billed many more hours more than that. When you think of how many hours you worked to have a billable hour, those were long days.
No doubt.
Yep.
Interesting. So how did you hear about Northwestern Mutual? I mean, I've read about it and heard about it.
Yeah. So I was, I was a policy owner and a client. I had an advisor who was in John McTeague's office, almost from the day I started at Seiferth. And I knew about the company, with the family ties in Wisconsin. I knew it was a mutual company based in Milwaukee, strongest company in the industry, all of that. And so I knew it first as a client and as a policy owner.
So it's my understanding that it's the strongest company in the industry as well.
Yeah,
but
still is.
You're so matter of fact about it. Like, what do others say when you say that? Like, is that factual? Is that the ratings companies say we're the strongest?
Yeah, it's factual. Everybody in the industry knows it. And I think it's accepted. I think, when I was at the ACLI meeting in January, where I had the opportunity to be there with 100 other CEOs from insurance companies, including the other big mutuals and some of the reinsurers. I mean, they know what our business model is like. They understand our financial strength, and they know where our companies are similar and where they're different. But yeah, I think it's widely known and just kind of accepted.
So if someone says to you, there's another company or two or three that have the same ratings from the major rating agencies, but you say you're the strongest, like, how do we explain that?
Well, there are very few that would be in that conversation. And I think we would look at, a bunch of things: surplus position, RBC, but also our liability profile. And I think one of the ultimate proof points is our ability to pay dividends at the rate we are, which is multiples of anyone else in the industry. I think those are the ultimate proof point on our ability to have, at the same time, best financial strength and best long-term value. The fundamentals that underlie the business, there are only so many drivers in a life insurance contract: expenses, mortality, investment returns, persistency obviously plays a huge part. And, those numbers are available, as you know, and those are the things where we outperform over very long periods of time. They're inherent in our business model. They're a consequence of good decisions from leaders who came long before me. And that's sort of the machine of our business model that provides leading financial strength and leading policy owner value. And that's who we are as a company.
So I feel the same way, and I see the numbers, and I struggled to explain it to other people, to be candid. Like, I'm always much better at focusing on the relationship than I am on the difference between companies.
Well, but I think that it's hard for you to explain it. It's hard, certainly, for average or even very sophisticated customers to understand it, which is why I think the relationship is so important. And
it supersedes.
And it's not even, there's an intangible here where really, like, the currency is trust. Because it's not just, do you believe it today? I think the average death claim we paid last year, or for a death claim we paid, the average amount of time the policy was in force was about 40 years. So you're really making a promise that's going to last decades or generations, or however you want to think about it. And so even if you could verifiably prove, hey, here's the math, this is what you should look at, you also have to believe that's going to be true in a really long time from now. Management teams that are going to come way after me. And one of the advantages we've had at Northwestern Mutual, I think, is the durability of our business model, commitment to financial strength, commitment to permanent life insurance value, commitment to exclusive distribution, certainly commitment to mutuality. And those tenets of our business model, even though lots of things have changed, those things have persisted. And, no one has a crystal ball, but I think if there's a company you want to bet on, Northwestern Mutual is a company that you should feel good about betting on. And actually, to that point, this was interesting. I talked about my dad earlier and my decision to leave for Northwestern Mutual. He didn't tell me it was a mistake, but he cautioned me because he viewed a legal practice as more entrepreneurial. Like, you're not subject to the whims of corporate America. You're running your own practice. You're a partner in a firm. And he had lived, obviously, through counseling lots of people through downsizing, restructuring, outsourcing, whatever you want to call it. Really highly placed people had lost their jobs because maybe they didn't do anything wrong. Something changed at the company. And I just remember telling him, like, Dad, if there's a company that I'm going to bet on, it's Northwestern Mutual. It's a mutual company. It's not going to be bought or sold. Their business model is their business model. And there are no sure things in corporate America. I get it. It's a Fortune 100 company, but I just believed in the integrity and durability of the company, and I continue to today. But I think you can prove it, and there's an element of that ultimately is an article of faith.
And for me, really, in all walks of life, for me, that's the intangible, that you refer to. Because without it, I mean, people can feel it. It doesn't matter if you're selling them a car or a financial plan.
Right.
I feel like they can sense intentions.
Well, you they can. You think of how many thousands of clients and prospects you've met with, and what it takes to build a relationship and trust and help people take action that they need to do, but they might not want to do. And the trust and relationship is at the heart of that.
Amen. So when you think about Butler and Notre Dame and your law practice, like, I feel like you have a lot of skills from different, including golf. But if you had to look,
some of the skills are atrophying more than others, Pat. But
my sense is it's like riding a bike a little bit. Like, your golf swing is probably still pretty good. Yeah. But what are the most important attributes that, for your position, and that you embody, sort of the office of the president, CEO, and chairman here, and also against the backdrop of the company, and its history?
So what are the common themes, or
like,
the
what
things
prepared you to be where you are today? I would say, what attributes?
I think, that's a hard question. I certainly a legal background is helpful in a highly regulated business. I think the fact that I've been in a lot of different environments, you think about the difference between Bluffton, Indiana, Rockford, Illinois, Chicago, law firm life. I've been good at navigating and building relationships and trust in lots of different areas. And I think that the other thing is, I credit my dad with this too. He said, he told me as a youngster that I had the capability to be a leader. And so whether it was in student government or the captain of a team or the president of a fraternity or, whatever I was helping out with at the law firm, I've been really a student of leadership all along the way. And while there are, you need to understand how the financials work at Northwestern Mutual. Obviously, it's a huge financial company, like it's a financial engine or a machine. I think my feelings around culture and around values and around leadership and the things that lead to enduring success, or the commitment to the process of what you have to do to continue to strive for excellence or whatever the next chapter is I think those are skills or experiences that I've learned along the way in a lot of varying, in a bunch of capacities. And of course, I've had a really varied career here at Northwestern Mutual in my 22 years, and being able to see the company from different seats, having as much exposure to the field as I've had, learning about the industry, and then you learn a lot from other leaders, things that you want to emulate and things that you don't want to do. And, so I think, and I would say there's one other common theme, beyond just relationship and trust building, which are certainly really critical components to leadership. The other thing for me that's been great preparation is just commitment to lifelong learning. One of the advantages you have as a litigator is you're sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. I loved new cases because I would learn a new industry or a new company or a new issue. And there's so much that's thrown at senior leaders today, given the pace of change. I'm not afraid of things that are new or different. I'm a really eager, curious learner. I accept that I don't know it all. I've got a lot to learn. I'm digging in a lot on technology right now, as one example. And I think that willingness to expand your perspective and pay attention to new things and not accept that what you've done before is automatically going to work. I think that's really good training for CEO or any senior leader.
So I thought you might say, and what I hear about you over and over is this like adjectives like cooperation, collaboration.
Yeah.
And then I've heard you speak many times and listened to a podcast not long ago where you mentioned mutuality and how that is in effect a form of cooperation between the people that run the company. And
it's like a big co-op.
It really is.
It is. Yeah. So I'm, there's no doubt. There are lots of different styles of leaders, and one of my, I think, experience set is, and one of the things I really enjoy about leadership is the ability to bring people together from different backgrounds or perspectives towards a common cause. It's you always want the 1 + 1 to be more than 2, and I really cut my teeth at this company navigating the relationship between the home office and the field. And I think I was at my best when I could help identify win-win solutions and bring people together to say, how can we make this work for the whole ecosystem? And, I've got lots of experiences of that in different, points in my history. But that commitment to winning as a team, and how do you figure out how to bridge differences and make sure you're focused on whatever the big goal is. It's Stan McChrystal's books, Team of Teams, and Chris Fussell's One Mission, been very influential to me as I think about how do you navigate a really dynamic, highly ambiguous, fast-paced environment and keep an organization aligned and moving forward. And I love that part of the job. And I don't, conflict is inherent in that, but it's like the working through it and the bridging of that is super rewarding.
And that's, back to Covey, right? That's what makes it stronger.
Absolutely.
Braiding the rope. But I thought for sure you were going to say The Boys in the Boat because.
Well, that's one of my favorites. And my, I do a lot of reading, and I asked my brother one time he does a lot of international travel. He's a consultant now for Bain. And I asked him, I said, give me like a fun book. Like, I'm reading economics and all this other leadership stuff. Like, he's like, oh, you got to read this Boys in the Boat book. And like the whole time I'm reading it, it's like the swing in the harmony of the team and how you blend all of the different skill sets of the people in different seats in the boat, and even the materials and the craftsmanship of the boat. I thought it was just a beautiful story. And so I ended up using it actually for work. I gave a bunch of people the book. We had Daniel James Brown speak at a couple of our leadership sessions at regional meetings years ago. But it's a beautifully written story. Fun movie too, but the book is really terrific.
Agreed. I loved it. And just the point about, if you push something over here, there's a consequence over there.
Yeah.
If one little thing is out of balance in your boat, if one person's oar isn't hitting right.
Totally. And I think that's one of the reasons at Northwestern Mutual, the fact that we rotate senior leaders around the company on their path upward is so important, because you can really think about your thing. But if you understand how moving this affects that, you really get a much better understanding of like the whole system of how the company operates, both home office and field. And it's really important. There's a lot of complexity there. But again, I find that challenge of leadership or responsibility of leadership to be really rewarding.
Back to the economics for a moment, and the pace of change in your life and decision making. Did you happen to read The Undoing Project and or Thinking Fast and Slow?
Undoing Project, no. Thinking Fast and Slow, yes.
They're similar.
Yeah.
But I feel like they're both super instructive.
Yeah, well, we could have a whole separate episode of Thinking Fast and Slow. Back in my more deliberate days, in addition to doing a lot of reading, I would tend to like sort of journal some notes from the books that I read. And I still go back to my notes every once in a while from Thinking Fast and Slow. I thought it was just, it's a terrific book, instructive on lots of levels.
So you've really gone through a process here at Northwestern, various different departments. To me, legal training, if I could have two designations that I don't, one would be a JD and one would be a CPA. I just feel like, Robert Ringer was the first person I listened to that talked about it. He said the JD is universally respected by other JDs. And so I always thought it would be handy to have that.
Yeah.
He called
I haven't used mine in that way in a long time. I think I'm still CE inactive or something, but yeah, it's great training.
But you can put it on your card, right? JD, even if you're not.
But rigorous thinking, lots of practice speaking and writing, persuasive communication and advocacy. It's hugely valuable.
To me,
I had an advisor, by the way, at Butler who told me it was a bad idea. He said it's a really expensive way to get that kind of training. And obviously I felt differently about it. It was expensive. The day I paid off my student loans was a happy day. But it's really, really valuable training for lots of different paths.
I just feel like it's almost like coding. Like it's a structural sort of way of thinking that I don't have. And I feel like if I had that, I'd be a little better off. And I'd have that universal respect.
I think there's still time for you, Pat.
I could do it. Corresponding.
Yeah, you could sequence the JD or the CPA. I don't know which one you want to do first, but there's still
I feel like the CPA, they should let me just sit for it. I think all the experience that you get.
You'd be closer on that one, I think.
Probably.
Yeah.
So when you think, like I was about to say, you've had this wide and varied experience. You have a broad educational background, a lot of on-the-job training in various departments.
Yeah.
But you're looking at the future now, and I feel like, do you remember that guy? I think it was Pat Robertson. He had this thing called the 700
Club.
The 7 rungs on the ladder of success.
Yeah.
And then I heard this guy, Rich Templeton, who went to Union College, by the way, CEO of Texas Instruments, was asked in a meeting by a young entrepreneur. The kid said, Mr. Templeton, I'm a young entrepreneur. What advice would you have for someone like me? And he said, decide fast and correct as you go. And I feel like what you said before, like you have a million things coming at you. And you're very cerebral, and we're a planning company, and we have the reputation for being like the 2,000-foot boat that's slow to turn. But on the other hand, you have so many issues coming at you that you have to decide on things and correct as you go in certain circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, how do you see the future? Like now, with the advantage of everything you've sort of been through, your experience in education, and where we're headed now.
Yeah, well, I would say, leadership's a journey, first of all. And I think speed of decision-making is something that I've had to work on. And when you're lower in the organization, you can take your time with things. And, so long as you meet whatever your deadline is, that's fine. When you're a senior leader, if you take your time with things, the organization's frozen waiting for you to decide. So in some cases, the most important thing is just to make a decision or to declare that you're not ready to do it. And so I'm curious. I like change and ambiguity. That's all great. Those are helpful skills to have as a leader. But you also have to be clear and declarative, or the organization just gets stuck. And so I've tried to make sure I'm intentional in thinking about where are the places where the organization's hung up, where it needs more clarity, where I want to render the ambiguity out of something to say, hey, the teams can go. And, obviously some decisions, are of greater consequence and you want to take more time and be deliberative. But some of them, like close enough is good enough. And I had some perfectionist tendencies that I've had to work through. I don't like being wrong. I don't like making mistakes. Most people don't. But sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is just not acting. And so, I've gained confidence and speed, I think, with decision making. The other thing is I would say there's kind of an aspect of compartmentalization. And that is, we have an amazing business model. We've got an unbelievable strategy. I've never been more bullish on the future of Northwestern Mutual. I laid out at the regional meeting what I think are our 4 most important focus areas for the future. I would describe those as like important for the now to near. So 2 to 5 years. I think the path for us as a company and the opportunity is really clear and really compelling. When you start extending the time horizon out, this has been interesting actually for me. One of the things I've noticed, like I think even just physically moving into this office in January, you start thinking with a longer time horizon. So I'm actually now understanding something John Schlifsky said to me a number of years ago. He said, a problem you have is my time horizon's longer than yours. And I thought, like, that's crazy. I'm younger. I'm hopefully going to be around longer. And what he meant was he's thinking longer term about the business. I'm thinking more day to day because I'm delivering, like we're performing. We have all this stuff we want to do in 2025. And he's thinking about what's the company going to look like in a decade. And I have really felt like with John leaving, I really feel the responsibility to make sure that, this is a company that's blessed, mutual company, not about quarterly earnings. We really can think in long-term time horizons, but really thinking about technology and the workforce of the future and what's our next opportunity as a company. And so I'm starting to bring the senior leader team along. So my direct reports, like in a pretty like rigorous, like strategic thinking and planning kind of process, but to really start extending our time horizon. Because when I think about this job, ultimately it's about stewardship. I'm very confident in our ability to perform in the short and near term, but you want to leave like the team and your successor with a company that's more relevant and vibrant than it's ever been, certainly than the company I inherited, which is an amazing company. And my intention is not to do that work like in a singular way. Certainly my vision and thumbprint on that will be important, but we've got a lot of really smart, really dedicated, really caring people. And so I'm having fun right now with the senior leader team, rolling up our sleeves and starting to look at how do we think about that next horizon. It's a lot of fun.
I imagine so. I feel like you're really well positioned.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the company is as strong as it's ever been, the fact that we have more capacity in the field force than we've ever had. You look at the growth of the insurance and the wealth business together, which I think is really catching the attention of the industry. People are starting to notice, like, how are you doing those both at the same time? And the advancements that we've made with our planning platform, we're really well positioned. So I like where we are.
That's great. When you think about the future, are you the kind of guy that thinks about retirement, or will you run through the finish line?
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm thinking about retirement very actively right now. What I'm thinking about is making sure I don't waste a day with the opportunity that I've got. I didn't take for granted, even as I was going through the succession process, as I was leading the field force, which I think is one of the best jobs in all of financial services. I didn't want to take for granted the fact that I had a really big and important job, and I wanted to do it to the best of my ability. And, I'm really energized by the work that we've got in front of us. So retirement for now anyway feels like a long way away, but I know I've talked to retired CEOs and they all tell me the same thing. It goes really fast. Things take longer than you think they do, go faster than you think you should. And so that sense of urgency, while I've got a long time horizon, that sense of urgency, I think, is a really healthy thing.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you might like to ask me or say or talk about before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would, you've done lots of fascinating podcasts. I would say, what stands out to you from the podcast that you've done to this time? And is there a question that you had on your list that you were hoping to ask me but didn't?
No, I asked everything. But the common theme among the fascinating people, I feel like, and I see it in all walks of life, that complexity is sort of a substitute for intimacy, and people need really good people skills in general to succeed in life, I feel, and or at least to succeed and endure. So I've found that most of the people that I've interviewed have really good people skills, and they might be off the charts smart. Maybe you are. Maybe John Schlifsky is. Maybe the guy I just interviewed. His name is Frank Ryan. He's the CEO and chairman of DLA Piper. Like, Frank, I sort of knew his brother when I was in high school. And his brother's a coach of the wrestling team at Ohio State. And his people skills are off the chart. I'm sure he's brilliant, but he just assimilates tons of information and allows everything to he's so relaxed. He's not two different people. Some people, they're sort of imperious or there's somebody that you should be afraid of or whatever. Right. And I feel like that's a fear of intimacy. Right. It's fear of intimacy with myself. I need to be that way because I'm insecure. Yep. And or because I'm afraid of you. You're going to hurt me, take my job, whatever. Yeah. But most of the people that I've interviewed are so comfortable in their own skin. And to me, it's a great reminder. And Jim Nemick, the guy who plucked me off Union College's campus many years ago, said it over and over and over. Because I'd say, what about this? What about that? He's like, don't worry about that. Just be yourself and just ask a lot of questions. When you're asking questions, you can't get in trouble, which is why I like to ask the questions. He says it's when you're talking that you get in trouble. So I try to keep my mouth shut. But you feel, we've known each other a long time. You just seem really comfortable in your own skin. And like I said, you hear it over and over about you. Collaborative. The word cooperation to me is how we rose above other species. And we continue to rise above by continuing to cooperate, which is why sometimes in, politics and whatnot, it's really terrifying because I feel like we're a lot alike, all of us, and
a lot alike. And I think it's a huge advantage we have in our system because we see the business through a different lens. Yeah. I see it from here in this corner office in Milwaukee. You see it by meeting with clients and prospects face to face every day. And I think the combined, like what we can do together when we sort of bring the best of our thinking about how do we think about, what's next in client experience or next in advisor experience or next from a product perspective, we're always going to be better together. Always. Agreed. And I've been really motivated by the fact that I've seen times when that wasn't happening. And I just feel like in those times, two things are true. We're leaving a lot on the table because we're not connecting, we don't have that bridge, and it's way less fun. So I've been an advocate for how do we win together, and I think we also have a lot more fun along the way.
So before she retired, Sarah Schneider and I had a bunch of really great conversations, and we continue to, but really meaningful conversations. And in one of them, I just was listening to her, and I said, intimacy and authenticity going forward are the coins of the realm. Because there's so much proliferation of information out there now. People need, in every walk of life, people need an expert or a guide to help them.
Yep.
And I just remember listening to a Notre Dame professor, actually, from where I live in Albany. And he said, we were at a golf course, and he said, in a decade, people in financial planning are going to be out of business. And I said, why is that? And he said, because all the tools are online. I can do my own financial plan. And I know where all the hidden costs are now. I know what it costs to buy a mutual fund,
Right.
and where the expenses are buried on both the manufacturer's side and on the distributor or retailer side. And insurance products where things are hard to figure out where the expenses are. That's all going to be disclosed.
Yep.
And so people in financial planning are going to be out of business. And as you know, the exact opposite has happened over the years.
Yep.
The more information that's become available, the more confusing it's become.
That's exactly right.
And it's such a paradox. And I feel like that's happening in every walk of life.
Yeah.
And that people are so hungry for human connection. And the fact that you're espousing it, and that Northwestern Mutual continues to focus on the relationship and the overlay of that with the technical piece. Because as Jim Nemick said, complexity is a substitute for intimacy.
Yeah, well,
he said it over and over.
Yeah, and I think there are two dimensions that are so important to our future, and we've seen this over and over again with the direct-to-consumer life insurers are now almost all B2B providers.
Mm-hmm.
They're helping agents and advisors because it just hasn't worked to go direct. And you're exactly right. Proliferation of information and tools has just left people more confused. McKinsey just actually published a great report on the fact that we have a shrinking number of advisors into a massively growing need. And so the work that you and your fellow advisors do out there has never been more important. But the other advantage we have is not only are we investing in that relationship, we are also one of the only companies that I'm aware of that is investing in growing people. So not only is that intimacy necessary in the client to advisor relationship, but it's also necessary for people to grow as professionals in their career. And we continue to operate this business like an apprenticeship, like what I had in my law firm, or you had starting with Jim Nemick, where you come into an environment where you're surrounded by people who are going to help you grow to your potential. And the fact that we have been able to do that organically when virtually every other company has walked away from that model, I think speaks to the fact that we're offering something really relevant, really important, and that we've, sort of the sky's the limit as long as we continue to do those two things, keep growing people who can be great advisors and leaders, and keep growing and building more new client relationships.
I couldn't agree more. And it's the whole person, like that, the Buddhists have it right. I think, you're never done learning. And the minute you get hubris, whatever, every religion talks about it. Pride cometh before the fall. I think I'll just stay on my knees because when I get up, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, well, and you're a great example of that, Pat. When you think about everything you've achieved in your career, you could be, kicking back your feet and like sharing yours, received wisdom with the masses. And you are as curious as an eager learner. Like you said, you feel like every day you're starting over and trying to figure it out. And I think that mindset is, it's probably why you are where you are today. But I think it's also just a great characteristic of our corporate culture.
Well, I feel like for me, it's self-awareness. I'm basically an egomaniac with an inferiority complex, and I'm self-aware.
It's sort of a painful thing to come to terms with, isn't it?
It is.
Oh my gosh.
But then that keeps me, okay, I got to do the next hard thing, which for us in our business, those of us who still do it, make a new relationship.
Yeah.
We could talk all about, ego and how its effect on people. But I have one last question.
Yeah.
And you may know what it is, but it's about the hyphen. It's the most important punctuation. Do you know why?
The dash?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
Why why is the hyphen?
You know why it's the most important punctuation?
I don't know. You tell me and see if I was tracking in the right direction.
Because it's what's on your tombstone.
Yeah, that's the dash, right?
The date of death.
Yeah.
So if I didn't know you at all and someone were telling me about you 50 years from now, What would you want me to know about you?
Hopefully at a high level, people would say about me that I made the most of the talents and gift that I have, so that I work towards my potential, and that I use those gifts for the benefit of others. And to be more specific, I hope they'd say I was a really good dad, I was a really good husband, and I was a really good leader. And that people know my values from knowing me, and that those came through in who I was.
Amen. From what I can see, you've succeeded.
I'm just getting started, Pat.
Exactly.
We're just warming up.
Exactly. We're on a continuum. But it's funny that you say that. This isn't about me at all, but I love the fact that you're saying make the most I could with the tools I had, basically. I want to see how much gas is in the tank. And I'm glad we're sort of similar age. It's going to be fun.
Well, when I was young, I really admired talent. And the more I get older, the more I appreciate grit and resilience and people who make the most of what they got. Mm-hmm. And it's inspiring when I see other people doing that. And, it's what I aspire to do.
One last story. Sure. My brother-in-law is a guy named PJ Stock, and he's like the life of the party. He's everyone's favorite. The joke in our family was, Pat's successful, but PJ played in the NHL. So PJ could be in prison, and he would still be the favorite. But he was a goon in the NHL, and he was very talented by any measure. But he played a B role, but he became famous. He ultimately played for the Boston Bruins and was the most popular player on the team during the time he was there. Yeah. And at his wedding, he married my wife's sister. And so at his wedding, the best man was this guy, Scotty. I forget Scotty's last name. But I said, was PJ always the best player on the team? And Scotty said, no. And I said, who's the best player on the team? And Scotty said, I was. And I said, why weren't you in the NHL then? And he said, because I didn't want it bad enough. He said, PJ willed himself to the NHL. And to me, I get choked up just thinking about it now. I mean, it's just, he made the most, he did what I think we all down deep want to do. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great story. Thank you for your time. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the conversation. It's been a lot of fun. Amen. Take care. Bye, Tim. Thank you. You too. If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcasts.